Hey everyone, welcome back. It's week 2, and we have 2 articles this week, no discussion boards. The 2 articles are Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr., written back in '63, I think, and The Good Society by Amtai Etzioni, prolific sociology writer. So let's talk about it. Letter from Birmingham Jail was written when MLK was in jail. And he was in jail because he didn't take out a permit to march. This is obviously during the civil rights era. He was in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most thoroughly segregated, racist, structurally, systemically racist places in the country. And so he was there because that's where injustice was most prominent, which is what he basically says in his article. This article is primarily directed at the clergy. He is responding to the clergy in this article, right in the area of Birmingham. What are you doing here? You're a troublemaker. You're an outsider. And he responds to all that saying, well, I guess I am here to cause unrest, troublemaker in that sense. I'm not an outsider. I have connections here. People have asked me to come here to help, to bring awareness to the racial, racist problems, here in Alabama, Birmingham. So, and I'm not an outsider also because no one within the boundaries of this country should be considered an outsider. And okay, so on some level you can say, well, it's a little bit tough when it's such a huge area. If I travel to somewhere in Appalachia, will they consider me an outsider? Reasonably, in some sense they would. Nonetheless, this is the point of his article. He is talking to these clergy members to make an argument that their understanding is wrong. But it's also a broader statement to the American public. So he says a few things in here that I think are of great interest. This is really quite an amazing piece of American writing, and anyone who has not yet read it, I hope you're in for a treat. So many of you will probably reference the injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere, and that's not actually a good answer to any of the assignment questions, but many of you will use it. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within these boundaries. It's a great sentiment, but not a particular answer useful in the assignment. He does give us something very useful that I just want to impart to you, even though it's not assignment specific. Any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. And I want you to think about this because we have had many protest movements in the last 10 years, and they did not adhere to these principles, sadly. First, there's a collection of facts to determine whether injustice exists. This seems painfully obvious, but it's actually not. You see, it was very easy during the civil rights era to say, obviously injustice exists. Why? What's the injustice? Well, we could actually point to it very clearly. There are laws in these places that make my skin color the reason why I have to follow a different set of rules that penalize me versus someone with a different skin color, right? So if I'm black, I am now limited in the type of loans I can take out, the places I can live, the places I can eat, go, drink, the fountains I can drink, the bathrooms I can use. This is a 2-tiered system. This is an apartheid state. Right. So it's very upfront, very obvious, very easy to point to. What are the things you want to change? I want those laws stricken from the books, and I want to be treated like every other American citizen. And in essence, what the early civil rights era was striving for was, we don't want special rules. We don't want you to have special rules, white majority. We want every American to play by the same set of rules. That is what is fair. Now, modern comments on race relations and politics actually doesn't adhere to that much anymore, sadly, but at the time, this is what they were calling for. So collecting facts to determine whether injustices exist. And of course, in that time, at that moment, they very much did that, and they had that nailed down. Then there's the next step is negotiation. Sadly, as he points out, and I think is generally accurate, power structures don't want to change. It's not because they enjoy being evil or malicious. Structures just don't like changing. In fact, people often don't like changing as a general rule. And so the negotiation step is necessary. And more often than not, it probably will fail. Sad to say. But it's necessary. Why? Well, what if it's going to fail most of the time, then why bother? Well, a couple different reasons that are important. If it works, that's awesome, because then you've avoided a whole bunch of other stuff down the road that you don't want to do. So if you negotiate and it's effective, huge win. But let's say it doesn't work, because it probably won't. Then why bother? Well, because you've just positioned yourself morally, logistically, tactically, right, in a certain advantageous position. Here are the things that we think are wrong. We've explained to you what they are, and we've told you what we would like instead. This is very good for a movement. You need to say problem or solution. Some of our modern movements don't have solutions, which is a huge flaw. Problem, solution, let's talk about it. We go to the table in good faith to talk about it. We would like you to change these things. We think they are dehumanizing, degrading, and ultimately unconstitutional. They've got to go. The response from our opposition is no. Okay, we tried, right? We have the moral high ground. We tried. You were the ones that walked away. You were the ones that wouldn't compromise or discuss. Then, because they probably say no, you go through this process of self-purification, which is probably less physical than it is metaphysical, spiritual. You are now on the road to direct action. So you're purifying yourself in this way that prepares you to put yourself in harm's way and potentially take literal slings and arrows, fire hoses, dogs, beatings. Should any human have to do this? No, they shouldn't. But we live in an ugly world. And so when you are trying to get the power structure to change its behavior, there is the possibility that you will be attacked violently. Now, this is a central problem we saw more recently. It is not fair that they have to do this. It really isn't. There's no one would make the argument that it's like, well, obviously they have to do this and this is just part of how it works. Yes, but it's still wrong. When you go and you're engaging in direct action, which is to put yourself, your body, out on the line, potentially facing physical harm, to spread this message, to bring awareness, right, to the public attention onto the thing you're talking about, you might be hurt. You cannot respond in kind. It is completely natural to want to respond in kind. If someone punches me, I want to punch him back and worse. But you can't. And you can't in these particular situations because of politics, because of optics, because of the media. If you have the moral high ground, here are the things that are wrong. We can point to them and we can argue and articulate very clearly how they're wrong. And we've done our best to negotiate in good faith, to beg you, to ask you to change these unfair policies. You refused us. And so now here we are out in public, asking the public, right, the public, the society at large, to help us, to side with us in changing these unfair laws. We may face violent blowback, right? If not from the police, from authorities, then from other citizens. And if we respond to that violence in kind, they will take that, they will use it, they will share that, and they will say, see what they do. Will it be unfair? Of course it will be unfair. Will it be dishonest and manipulative? Obviously. And yet, we cannot give them that tactical advantage. King was a brilliant strategist. Do not underestimate him, especially in that realm. It doesn't work in every society, right? We have free press in this society, and so when they were marching in the streets, when they were attacked, when they were beaten, and they did not respond in kind, what the American public saw was heart-wrenching. They didn't see these protesters and the police fighting in the streets and like, well, they're fighting, you know. No, they saw innocent, passive civilians asking for their rights, and they were being beaten by authority figures, right? It was very one-sided. That was what made it effective. Unfortunate, but it was effective nonetheless. Unfortunate they had to do that, is my point. I make that point because it's really an important point that we all should wrestle with. Okay, well, moving on. He also has a really interesting discussion about when and how to engage in that direct action. And I'll draw a connection here with modern example of Colin Kaepernick. Most everybody knows who he is now. He is an NFL quarterback. I don't know how good he was because I don't watch the NFL, but he was more famous, sadly, for ultimately getting fired from his position because he took a knee during the national anthem because he wanted to have a discussion about racial politics in the United States. Whether he was right or wrong is kind of beside the point. He believed something to be true, and he wanted to have a discussion about that, and he wanted to bring the public's attention to it. He had a friend in the military who said, well, don't sit for the national anthem. That's pretty disrespectful. Take a knee. That's better. Colin Kaepernick is no Martin Luther King. What ended up happening was someone on social media, might have even been the president, I'm not sure, it doesn't really matter, changed the narrative from a guy taking a knee and wanting to talk about racial issues to he took a knee during the national anthem. He disrespected our anthem, our flag, our symbols of national unity, which Kaepernick just didn't fully appreciate when he got himself into that. And Jonathan Haidt will have more to say about that, actually. Unrelated, but it fits together perfectly. And so what ended up being, I just want everybody to pay attention so we can talk about something, was he's unpatriotic, disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the national anthem, and disrespecting the military, right, because they were presenting the flag. And so he lost control of his message. And if he was a greater student of King, he might have thought a little more about how he went about doing this. So King did consider all those things, and there's a little example in there about how he was going to do the march, but then there was an election coming up, and it was involving some particularly like nasty racist figures, and he's like, no, we don't want to get involved in that. We don't want them to think we're trying to manipulate politics. In essence, of course, we are, but we don't want them to use that as a political football. So we're going to wait. We're going to wait. And eventually they chose the time to go march during, I think, the Easter season, which is a very busy time for the merchants. And so they marched to hit the merchants in the pocketbooks because the merchants had previously agreed to take down all these racist signs about no blacks, no colored, whatever. And then the signs came back up. They broke their agreement. Again, masterful strategies. The assignment is going to ask you to mention or to explain two of his explanations of justice. And I am going to mention them to you here. So he asks that people obey laws, obey good laws, but disobey bad laws. How could he do that when he's getting involved in direct action, which might potentially break laws? How can you, I'm reading from him here, how can you advocate breaking some laws and disobeying others? The answer, he responds, lies in the fact there are two types of laws, just and unjust, but that's not your answer. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Very quickly, we could think of stealing, murder. There are laws against this, and it is good that there are laws against that. We don't want to encourage that. However, running a stop sign doesn't really have a moral valence. It's just a neutral law that we've all agreed upon, that we have these things. There are stop signs. We put them at certain points to stop cars from running into each other. So I guess on that level, if you run a stop sign, it could potentially be immoral. So there are laws that have more and less moral valence to them, but then there are laws that separate people, right, into different classes and treat them differently. And those are not just laws. Those are not fair laws. They're even actually unconstitutional according to the 14th Amendment, at the very least. Here is where your answers to the question come in. What is the difference between the two just and unjust laws? He gives two examples of just and unjust laws from a more of a religious, philosophical position, because he's a pastor, he's reverend. And then after that, he gives a more secular, rational argument, a more concrete explanation for the rest of us normies. So here's some language. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal or natural law. Remember that one, natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority, the segregated a false sense of inferiority. You're not really better, and you're not really worse. You can read further into the paragraph, but I think that gets the point across. In the next paragraph, let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical power majority, like the white majority, compels a minority group, blacks, to obey but does not make binding upon itself. It seems pretty straightforward. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow that is itself willing to follow. One law governing all citizens, as opposed to one law for you, but a different law for me. Right? Hopefully that's obvious. This is sameness made legal. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. No representation, like no taxation without representation. So anyway, that is basically the answer to the question that you're asking the assignment. And if you watched this far, there you are. There is more to be said in here, a lot more, in fact. He talks about don't give in to bitterness, to spite and resentment. They are understandable sentiments and feelings, but they also will lead you astray, bad positions to make decisions from. And he implores the American public, if you don't do what I am asking, if you don't change the laws in a way that I am suggesting and create fairness and equality of law, you are going to drive a substantial portion of the black community into the arms of Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, who is calling for race wars and greater separatism. It's understandable why they make those claims. If you're living in an apartheid state where you don't seem to have any recourse and this is just your lot in life, then yeah, violence does seem like an obvious choice. Understandable. I get it. However, what would the outcome of that race war be? It would be highly destructive, and the numbers just weren't on their side. So King is just saying, if you don't do what I'm asking, you will push the people into the arms of those individuals who are willing to get violent, and then everyone loses. So he had a lot more to say. I would say at least the first 5, 6 out of 8 pages have some really amazing stuff. And you really should read the whole thing anyway, because you're an American, and this is a great piece of American writing. But if you're an international student, that's okay. You should still read it because it's a great piece of philosophical writing. At 18 minutes, that is a long discussion of King. I will make another video where I talk about Etzioni.